Welcome in to Outkick the Show. I'm your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I hope all of you are having fantastic, fantastic Wednesdays, wherever you may be across this country or this great land. Your boy here is in between one of his 18 different jobs, knocking out Outkick the Show, about to hop on and do a lock it in here in a little bit. We got a lot to get to. We got the Nfl Cba decision, why I think the players need to do it. Thank you for the haircut feedback. Solid haircut here. Le Batard, shots fired against me. I responded on the radio. I'll respond here as well. Democratic debate last night was an abject failure and a disaster. And I got to give you my Bachelor analysis. I've been thinking a lot about this show. I'm obsessed with this year's Bachelor. If you're not watching, you're wasting your life. So let's go ahead and dive into everything. Let's start with the NFL Cba analysis. To me, this is a no-brainer. The NFL players should vote to agree with the existing offer that is out there from the owners. I think a lot of people don't understand the basics here. So let me take a step back and try to give you a little sense of the basics here. Under this collective bargaining agreement, the NFL players would receive 48% of all net revenue as salaries. Let me repeat that. 48% of all net revenue would go to the players. This is one of the highest numbers that I can imagine anywhere in the world when it comes to what percentage of revenue labor gets. We're not talking about owners. We're talking about labor, all right? Most of you probably don't see the books of whatever business you work in. I would be stunned if there are very many people out there who are employees and bring in 48% of the revenue that they produce as salary. That is a monumentally high number that is out there. And so, what else people miss is, so the players are getting a really good deal. What else is out there? And by the way, Adam Schefter tweeted it out, and there's always accounting debates about exactly how much the players are getting and whatnot. And look, I'm a capitalist. I want everybody to make as much money as possible, okay? But when you actually look at the numbers, out there, that arguably, at least according to Adam Schefter, is better than the share that NHL, MLB, and NBA players get, I believe, of the overall revenue that's produced. And there's a difference between gross and net revenue, and we can all get into accounting arguments, and the guy who's analyzing tax codes and talking about the lack of state income tax who always dives in when you start talking about these aspects. I got to tell you, this is a good deal. Here's the other thing that isn't getting enough attention. Sometimes people get so focused on being antagonistic that they don't understand that they are actually on the same side for large percentages of this negotiation. Owners and players are both incentivized to drive up revenue as high as possible. That's why the owners want to go to market right now in the spring and summer before a presidential election, because right now the last 2 years of NFL ratings have been up. Typically, in an election year, in the fall, ratings go down. So given how hard fought and how much of the oxygen is going to be soaked up in the entertainment atmosphere by Donald Trump against, it looks like, Bernie Sanders, we'll get to that in a minute, why would you not want to go before there's an election? And while you know the economy is still good, we just had an all-time high in housing starts or whatever the heck's going on. I know the market's been down the past couple of days because of the coronavirus, but over time, the market is really good right now. You are primed at Fox, CBS, NBC, ABC, Disney, all of those different businesses right now. You are primed for a big, big revenue gain. Potentially as much as taking the NFL's television revenue from $7.5 billion a year to $15 billion a year, okay? That is where you are potentially going to go, and the NFL players get 48% of that number. So I think it makes sense for the NFL players to ratify this deal, to take 48% of the revenue, to play 17 games, to go and add 2 more playoff teams for the postseason, and to make a lot more money than you are right now. Also, the minimum salary in the NFL is being bumped up by $100,000. We forget a lot of the time that the vast majority of players do not make that much money in the NFL. There are about 20% who make a lot of money. Quarterbacks, high-end wide receivers, left tackles, corners. Those guys can make a lot of money. The vast majority of NFL guys are there for 3.6 seasons. If you make $500,000 a year for 3.6 seasons, that's not bad, but it's $2 million. After taxes, that's $1.2 million. It's not like you can retire. It's not like your life is fundamentally different. Getting that guaranteed money bump up at the back end of the deals actually makes a lot of sense. So again, you're a lot of these guys 26, 27 years old and your pro football career is over. Make that money while you can. I don't blame them. But again, as a capitalist, I think this is a good deal. I think that right now, you know the television market is ripe. You don't know what it's going to be next year. Cord cutting is going to continue. Maybe Bernie Sanders gets elected and the economy takes a hit because suddenly we got a socialist trying to run a capitalistic country. All of those things can be major issues, particularly if you got 32 team owners who are billionaires and suddenly Bernie Sanders considers the word billionaire to be the equivalent of a slur. I'm a capitalist. I think that Steve Jobs, I think that Warren Buffett, I think Bill Gates, I think all these guys who created businesses and became billionaires deserve the money that they made. More power to them. I just don't think it's remotely difficult. This is a deal that I believe they should make. All right? A couple of other thoughts here on the NFL CBA. There's a certain antagonism that I think isn't warranted here. Reports are that the player representatives for the teams voted 17-14 with one guy abstaining. I think it's going to be close, but remember, all they need is 50% plus one of the voters, okay? 50% plus one of the voters, and they will be able to have this thing ratified. It is a really, I think, good deal that works well for fans, that works well for players, that works well for owners. I think they should put it to bed, have great labor peace for the next decade. If I were a player, I would be voting for it. All right, couple of things on top of the NFL CBA. Dan Le Batard, I don't know how many of you guys saw this. I'm curious, how many of you saw Dan Le Batard take a shot at me? I'm always curious how much attention people actually pay to this stuff. Did anybody see Dan Le Batard take a shot at me? I'm curious. A lot of you probably didn't see it. And so I always wonder, like, should I respond when people are taking shots at me? Should I not? I mean, it's an interesting question, right? What do you say when people take shots at you? I got people taking shots at me all day. If I go into my verified tab, there are all these blue checkmark guys who literally get no reaction because they don't have any fan base, and they go out there and they get a lot of attention and everything else. So Dan Le Batard, let me give you a backstory here. I don't know Dan Le Batard personally. I respect the fact that he's good at radio, that he is good at television, and that he's good at writing, because there aren't very many of us who have been good at all three of those things, right? And I've said this from the get-go. Tony Kornheiser, to me, was my initial idol in the space because he was a writer who did great radio, who did great television. And I still think Tony Kornheiser, for that reason, is a trailblazer. When I was going to college in D.C., I would listen to his local radio show. It was fantastic. I would read his Washington Post columns back in the day. It was absolutely incredible work that he did. So when I started writing online, I didn't just want to write online. I wanted to be good at radio, and I wanted to be good at TV too. So I believe I'm good at all three of those things now. And so Tony Kornheiser was the first. There still aren't very many of them. So I respect the fact that Dan Le Batard, Jason Whitlock, guys like that have been capable of doing all three things and doing them well, just because there isn't very much of a baseline for guys who can do all three well. Okay, so I'll say that the backstory. This evidently, Dan is fired up because Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre lost their jobs as a television host, and he said in particular, what did he say? He said he ripped his own company, and he said that the cancellation of the show was, quote, a victory for dumb people. Now, look, ultimately, whether you agree or disagree with any show's cancellation, everybody's in the ratings business. My ratings on radio dictate whether I get another television contract. My ratings on television in the sports gambling TV space dictate to a certain extent whether I get another television contract. The number of people who read and consume my content dictates how much money I make as a business owner. If you are in the business of selling your words, either written or spoken, you are in the business of selling them to as large of an audience as possible. So I don't get into this whole purity thing of like, oh, this guy was too smart to have a big audience, or this guy was what. Your goal is to have as big of an audience as possible. If you don't want to have a big audience, you can make less money. If you are making millions of dollars a year, as people in our space are, then you have an obligation to deliver eyeballs to your employer, right? I am my employer for most of my income. I'm an employee for a small part of it on television, partially an employee on radio. I own a large portion of my radio show. But all of those things aside, I think Dan's unhappy at ESPN. And I think he's unhappy at ESPN because he has seen the woke universe, the people who believe Caitlyn Jenner is a hero, the people who believe that Michael Sam was one of the biggest stories in the history of the NFL, the people who want that to be the focal point of ESPN are slowly losing their jobs. Michelle Beadle, I hate football, she's gone. Jamel Hill, the president's a white supremacist, she's gone. Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre, left-wingers who are on the Caitlyn Jenner is a hero side of the political spectrum, which is fine, but most sports fans aren't there. And so that audience is losing, right? And I think Dan Le Batard, honestly, doesn't feel like he fits in very well at ESPN anymore. So I think most of the time when people are taking shots at me, it's not really about them, it's about their discomfort. So I think Dan's unhappy at ESPN. I think he wants out. Maybe he'd be happier with the podcast. Maybe he'd be happier going to work at DAZN. But he decided to take shots at me on his show yesterday. And the Big Lead wrote about it, which was where I saw the story. And otherwise, I don't know that I would have heard about it. But Dan Le Batard, he talked about, do you remember when he and John Skipper were out in a North Carolina restaurant and they were drinking, and it was right after John Skipper resigned and cited substance abuse issues? I don't have anything against John Skipper, by the way. Former president at ESPN, we have a lot of different beliefs, likely a lot of different political beliefs. I don't have anything personal against him, right? I think he made some bad decisions in hiring. Doesn't mean I think he's a bad dude, okay? So, someone that I know well was in the same restaurant that they were in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And they sent me a picture and said, ESPN's president resigns for substance abuse issues, and he is now drinking at the bar with Dan Le Batard in a public restaurant. Now, Dan Le Batard went on his radio show and said, well, there were glasses in front of us, but we weren't drunk, or I don't even know exactly whether he was saying they were drinking or not. My guy was sitting next to them at the bar and said they were definitely drinking Beefeater gin, specifically. He sent me a photo, all right? And I said, this is not a real story, okay? If you say that you're resigning for substance abuse issues, and then that same week you go out drinking, essentially, and I don't remember the timeline exactly, but this is a couple years ago that he's talking about. You go out drinking with one of the most prominent employees at ESPN. To me, that's a pretty big story, okay? Whether or not you agree with it as a story, it's a big story, all right? You're out in public. You've resigned from ESPN for substance abuse issues, and you now are drinking at the bar with a prominent ESPN employee in public, okay? So that in and of itself seems a little bit strange. So I wrote about it. I put up the picture. I said something doesn't smell right here. This excuse doesn't make sense. John Skipper later came back and said that the reason why he resigned was because he was being extorted over a cocaine addiction. So that is the story. Now, Le Batard is of the opinion that that was totally unfair. I'm going to read his quote. It's totally unfair, but it's what this dude traffics in. This is Dan Le Batard on his radio show. He's a lawyer. He's an otherwise smart person. Maybe he's smart for just doing this for profit, but I really do question the sincerity. He's carved his own lane, but it's a hateful lane. It's a divisive lane. It's a profitable lane for him, but he's the one who's got to wake up in the morning and look in the mirror. I wouldn't change any decisions that I've ever made in my career. I wouldn't. And that's because the one thing that I try to do every single day is I wake up and I get on the radio and I am 100% honest with my opinions. I don't worry about anything other than sitting down on the microphone and being as honest as I possibly can for 3 hours about everything that I believe. 100% honesty. That's my goal every single day. Now, I understand that some people don't agree with my opinions. That doesn't bother me. Doesn't bother me at all that people have different opinions than me. I believe in the marketplace of ideas. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. So I sit down and say 100% what I believe every day for 3 hours. To such an extent that my wife gets nervous listening to the podcast while she works out because I say the exact same thing on the radio that I say in private conversation with her. There is no filter for me. I believe that what we crave in society today is authenticity, and I think there are so many people who are patently inauthentic that my goal is to sit down and tell you exactly what I think about the world at large through the prism of sports every single day. And so if you talk to anybody who knows me, that listens to the radio show, including my wife who knows me pretty well, and I believe that there is nobody who's more honest on his radio program or in sports media than I am every single day, okay? That's my goal. And so I don't understand the divisive or hateful angle. My job is to be honest. My job isn't to make sure that I say things that 100% of people agree with. If you study my career, and I'd encourage you to go study it, what you will find is that I am maybe the least hypocritical person in all of sports media, because I think about my opinions all the time as if I am a judge. This is where the lawyer side of me plays in. Every time I go on the air and I share an opinion with you guys, I'm thinking about it in the context of prior opinions that I have shared. It's why there are very few things, if any, that you can point to and say, hey, wait, you treated that guy differently, or you treated that team differently than you did somebody else. I think about every opinion I have as being built, if you're a lawyer, on the foundation of the common law, where one precedent builds to another one's, okay? And so, as a result, as you move through, I am 100% consistent, okay? It's why my treatment of, let's say, something in political universe, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, who's a Democrat, was the exact same, Justin Fairfax, I believe was his name, was the exact same as my treatment of Brett Kavanaugh when it came to allegations of sexual assault or sexual harassment or whatever you want to say. Everybody was treated the exact same by me because I think like a lawyer and precedent matters to me. And so as a result, I think that in the grand scheme of things, as you're working through and paying attention to my opinions, what triggers people like Dan Le Batard is their opinions aren't consistent because they have embraced an idea of identity politics, which is predicated on treating people differently based on their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their religion, their sexuality. I don't care about any of that stuff. My goal is to treat everybody the exact same regardless of their identity. And ultimately, the reason why identity politics doesn't work on a national level very well in the world of sports, aka woke sports, is because so many people come to sports to escape identity politics. They love the fact that on a scoreboard, both teams start at 0. That in a golf match, both golfers start at the exact same score. We don't adjust the scoreboard and give somebody 20 extra points because they're rich, or because they're poor, or because they're black, or because they're white, or because they're Asian or Hispanic, or any of those things. The best man wins. Sports innately are about the belief in the individual and his or her ability to triumph against all others, either on their own or as a part of a team. And so what you get inherently here is when the woke sports mindset arises, people get upset because I don't supplicate my opinions based on the identities of others. I'm going to treat LeBron James the exact same as I'm going to treat Tom Brady. And I'm going to treat Serena Williams the exact same as I'm going to treat Maria Sharapova. And so that upsets some people because they have this pyramid of victimization in their head, and they're like, oh, you have to treat this person differently because of their identity. I don't believe in identity politics. I believe in individual equality, and I think sports is a perfect representation of that. So that's my response to Le Batard and others of his ilk. I don't have any problem with them. They're entitled to their opinion, but I think the reason why I get under their skin is deep down, they know I'm right. Because if you truly like sports, I believe you have to abhor identity politics. Because sports is a unique connective fabric in our country that brings us all together regardless of what our background is. When somebody scores a touchdown and you're both rooting for the same team, you don't think about who they rooted for president. You don't think about where they went to church or mosque that morning, or whether they're Jewish or Hindu or any other difference. You don't think about who they're sleeping with. You turn and you give them a high five because you're a part of the same tribe, which is a rooting for that team tribe. Sports breaks down barriers. And what people don't get who want to build up the identity politics differential and immediately argue that everything is based on race or gender or sexuality or anything else is, I don't buy that game. I think we should treat every athlete the exact same regardless of their background. And that upsets a lot of people. And so as a result, I would say that's my response. Le Batard has an open invite. I'd love to talk to him on my podcast. He has an open invite on my radio show. I would be happy to go on his radio show. That is where we could have a longer form conversation. Some of you might enjoy it. I am open to talking to anybody. This ties in with another statement I was going to make before I get to my analysis of Democratic politics debate last night. I got a bunch of complaints from people. A lot of people came out and said recently, I guess Michael Bloomberg has been buying a lot of ads. Mayor Bloomberg, who's running for the Democratic nomination, has been buying a lot of ads on our podcast network with Outkick the Coverage, and he's been buying a lot of ads with the radio show during commercial breaks and everything else. And I had people reaching out to me and email me, and they were saying, hey, I'm upset. I'm upset at you because you are taking money from Michael Bloomberg, and I'm hearing these ads during your programming. And my response to them was, anybody can buy ads on my program. I don't discriminate whether Democrat, Republican, or independent. I don't choose the people who want to reach my audience. If Mayor Bloomberg believes that his money is well spent trying to reach the Outkick audience, more power to him. If Donald Trump believes it, if Tulsi Gabbard believes it. See, this is what, again, triggers some people. I don't discriminate. I'm open to people making arguments regardless. I would have Joe Biden on my radio show. I would have Donald Trump on my radio show. I would have Marco Rubio on my radio show. I would have Nancy Pelosi on my radio show if they wanted to come on and talk about sports and then maybe get a couple of political questions thrown in as well. I am 100% in the business of capitalism. And if people want to buy ads from me, I will sell it to them. Now, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different if you're asking me to personally endorse a product. I need to know that. Everything else, I haven't ever done that for a political candidate on my radio show. But the ads that run during our commercial breaks, I'm not in the opinion that we should be censoring it. And by the way, I have the right to do that. Under my contract, I could go back to Fox Sports Radio and say, I refuse to allow any political advertisements to air during my radio program. Or I could say, I only want Republican ads to air. Or I only want Democrat ads to air. But I'm not going to do that. I think if people want to reach my audience, we should be open to everybody. Just like I would allow Coke and Pepsi to both advertise, I'll allow the Republicans and the Democrats. I believe that my audience is smart enough to discern who they should vote for without having to hear from me. So that is the breakdown. And yeah, by the way, if you listen to Sports Talk Radio, how much percentage of Sports Talk Radio ads are erectile dysfunction? A huge percentage of Sports Talk Radio ads are erectile dysfunction ads. It's not like we're talking about the greatest collection of advertisers of all time. It's like Viagra or Mayor Bloomberg. Both of them can buy ads if they want to run ads on my network. I'm not going to actually apologize for it. But I do think being fair and honest with you guys is a part of what I do, so I thought I should address it. Democratic debate last night. Man, I thought this is a mess. This is a mess for the Democrats last night. I watched the debate. The biggest winner was Donald Trump, and he wasn't on the stage. If you make me pick the Democrat that I thought was the best, probably it's Joe Biden. And Joe Biden said last night that 150 million Americans had been killed by guns since 2007. So Joe Biden was not very good. Again, he said almost half the country's population had been killed by gunfire in the last 13 years. But he still was the best of the bunch, I believed. Now, I think Bloomberg is probably the best nominee because I think he's the smartest. I think he's the most capable. I think he is the most mainstream of the Democratic candidates at this point in time. And I kind of like the idea of it being a New York Republican turned Democrat running against, and then Michael Bloomberg running against a New York Democrat turned Republican in Donald Trump, because I think it kind of speaks to the absurdity sometimes of our modern day politics. But I think it's going to be Bernie Sanders who gets the nomination. And I said this on the radio show, I've tweeted it, but I'll say it on this show too. I am not going to vote for Bernie Sanders if he's running against Donald Trump. That's not because I believe Donald Trump's perfect. That's not because I agree with everything, certainly, in the world of Donald Trump's platform. But it's because I am, at my essence, a capitalist. I believe that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett and Walt Disney are all capitalistic heroes. I look up to incredibly successful businessmen. I believe that there should be billionaires in our society. I believe that individuals should be rewarded handsomely when they create massive amounts of wealth and jobs. And so, as a result, I can't vote for Bernie Sanders. At its most basic level, socialism is wrong. Maybe this is me being old, but I'm 40, and I'm old enough, unlike a lot of you knuckleheads in your 20s, to remember what the Soviet Union was like when we were in the Cold War. I'm old enough to remember what far left-wing politics leads to. And I wish that every single 20-something would go to Cuba. I wish we could go and send every single 20-something to Cuba to see what happens when socialism is embraced and market-based dynamic capitalism is rejected. The people suffer. They don't produce quantities of success on that island. They have less political rights. All of those things are indisputably true, which is why I don't understand why Bernie Sanders is continuing to defend Fidel Castro and sounding like Colin Kaepernick in the process. Just because people in Cuba can read doesn't mean that they're being treated fairly. And we shouldn't praise small things that are done that are successful in countries that are totalitarian dictatorships and authoritarian regimes that take away basic human rights from their people because they do one or two things well. I think Bernie lost Florida with his comments endorsing Fidel Castro, and I think it's a super bad move by him, regardless of the political ramifications, to not repudiate socialistic states. The fact that he's out there praising Venezuela's of the world, the fact that he's out there praising the Soviet Union back in the day, all of these things bother me and are why I'll be voting for Donald Trump. And I think the Democrats, give him credit, Bloomberg, Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar, and and Joe Biden are all trying to attack Bernie Sanders. But I think the Democrats are pedaling head on into a brick wall, and Bernie Sanders is going to be a disaster if they end up with him. A couple of more stories. Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, out of nowhere decides that he is going to step back from his CEO role. I wonder on some level, one of two things. Is Iger laying the groundwork for either a vice presidential nomination if Mike Bloomberg became the Democratic nominee, or could he be trying to seed himself out there as a potential out of nowhere candidate in the event that there was a contested Democratic convention? Something worth thinking about. Or is he trying to lay the groundwork to run for president in 2024? I don't have a problem with Iger. I think he is a strong capitalist based on what he's done at Disney. I think he'd be a good candidate for the Democrats. I don't know that he's capable of actually getting the nomination, but it's worth thinking about now that he's stepped back suddenly and I think unexpectedly. I know he's still going to be chairman of the board, but that kind of came out of nowhere. So I'm a little bit uncertain about what's going on there. Finally, I love The Bachelor. All right, I'm going to finish off with The Bachelor. I don't know how many of you watch The Bachelor. If you don't, I watch it with my wife. In fact, we watch it with our kids too. I don't know, maybe exposing them at too young of an age to The Bachelor hijinks, but the kids enjoy the show too. And I got to tell you, they've had a lot of sports connections recently. Madison, who I think is the best possible candidate on the show right now, is the daughter of an Auburn assistant basketball coach. And in her episode of the Hometown Visit, Bruce Pearl and Charles Barkley were both featured, welcoming The Bachelor to Auburn. But this, to me, is a really intriguing question. Madison is saving herself for marriage, which is her right, like anybody else. She can choose to be a virgin at birth. I mean, at wedding. We're all hopefully virgins at birth. A virgin at her wedding day. I don't know what percentage of people are virgins when they get married. What percentage would you guys guess? Like, what percentage of people who are getting married in the year 2020 are going to be virgins when they get married? 5%? I think 5% is probably a high level. Maybe 1 in 20. Some of you are saying 10%. Less than 10%, I would say, are virgins in the United States of America when they actually get married. Maybe it's higher. I don't know. I would say around 10%. All right, 10% is high, right? Less than 10% would be my answer. But she has that right, okay? If you know that you want to marry a virgin, why in the world did he think that he could sleep with 2 other girls and then propose to her 5 or 6 days later? Like, I understand the analysis here. I understand the argument of why did she ever go on the television show if she knew the way the show ends, it ends with the fantasy suites, all those other things, right? I understand why you might ask that question. But my question for you is, if you are Pete, Bachelor Pete, and you know that you love this girl and you want to spend the rest of your life with her, do you really think that you can get away with sleeping with the 2 other girls a week before you propose to her? Do you really think that's going to fly? And look, I don't blame him if his goal is just to go on television, meet a bunch of good-looking girls, and then get to leave the television show, eventually break up the engagement, and just go across the country sleeping with every girl who's been watching The Bachelor, which is basically every good-looking girl on the planet. But why does he think that he's going to be able to make that decision, especially when she told him? Now, let me say this. If I'm going to criticize Madison at all, it's for this. She should have told him she was a virgin, and she should have given him that ultimatum before he picked the 3 girls to go and take down to Australia. Okay? That's the biggest criticism that I would give of Madison. Because if he doesn't want to follow that ultimatum, and if he wants to sleep with all the other girls, then he should not have taken her to Australia. That's my only criticism of her. She knew that was her standard. She knew that that was going to be, she knows what happens when you go down to Australia. They have the fantasy suites and everything else. All she had to do was let him know. And I also understand the argument of how many men can say no to smoking hot girls who are desperately hoping that you're going to sleep with them and that you're going to fall in love with them and that you're going to get engaged. Now, it's not a traditional setup, but there aren't very many women out there who, if their fiance said, hey, just so you know, at my bachelor party, I'm going to go sleep with a bunch of other women, and then when I come back, I'm going to get married in a week. I don't think there are very many women that would sign up for that. So this is obviously not a normal experience and situation, but I think Madison is the best pick, and I think he may well have blown it. All right, I love all of you. My name is Clay Travis. I got to go get ready for television. 1 hour on FS1. Lock it in. Get hooked up. Enjoy it. This is Outkick the Show. DBAP, unless you need to SBAP. Kisses. I'll see y'all tomorrow. See y'all. Thank you, Facebook.